let's be honest, female characters suck. Or at least in less clickbaity terms, a lot of them do. A lot of female characters suck. Throughout history, people have found a voice through art. Storytelling has played a key role in our society through many different expansive forms of creation. Painting, drawing, music, film, television, writing, the list goes on. However, not everyone in society has had an equal opportunity to have a voice. This has left us with an absence of certain stories being told and a weakened general understanding of those that were previously silenced or spoken over. While many groups fall into this category, and I could spend just as much time talking about minorities, today we are going to specifically be talking about women. In our modern world, women have had a stronger voice than they've ever had before. Yet society's understanding and representation of women still seems to be detached. Why is this? For years up until present, we have lived and continue to live in a male-dominated world. This has created a bubble of standards and vision and writing directly formed around the male gaze. The male gaze is the presence of a hypothetical male audience that constantly surrounds women in the world they live in. The male gaze both lives in a literal form and also a more ghostly, intangible form that is weaved into our society through patriarchy. The male gaze expects women and most everything else in the world to serve their desires, expectations, and fantasy. While women very much exist within the male gaze, we are deformed, caricatured versions of ourselves. Confident, but not in a threatening way. Sexy, but sweet and soft. Beautiful, but doesn't know it. Submissive, or strong enough just to be desirable, but no more. All characteristics that can be great, but are not what makes up a woman. What the male gaze has done to female characters is reduce them to just that. Characters. Characters of desire and fantasy, not reality. Because of this, the true identity and humanity and nuance of women has been lost. And we can still see this everywhere, even in a more modern feminist society. While the results of this can be found in many aspects of our society, today we are going to be talking and focusing on film and television. I, of course, want to preface this discussion with a few disclaimers. Here's my disclaimer that I will read to you now. I will be using a lot of harsh, matter-of-fact, generalized language to convey my thoughts, but none of what I'm saying is necessarily a guaranteed fact. It's just my opinion and interpretation of the world I live in. This topic is also not meant to be an attack on men. While I don't really like the use of the phrase, not all men, I do acknowledge that to be true to some extent. Again, my generalization is targeting the worst of men as a patriarchy and the misogyny that comes with it, not necessarily individuals. That being said, if you are a man, I really hope you stick around for this very important conversation. I also want to mention that I actually like most of the female characters we will be discussing today, and that a well-written female character can very much exist outside of female writing. We will go over great examples of these in just a sec.
I also want to add that this topic is extremely nuanced, and that as a cis straight woman, I will only be discussing these women and subjects through the straight cis lens they are usually catered to. I do, however, understand the complexity that is gained when adding in sexuality and gender identity, especially when discussing characters like Valkyrie that I will be mentioning later on. Please don't feel that I'm ignoring this aspect completely.
I want to start this discussion with what makes a good female character. I think for the most part that any female character women can relate to and enjoy can be considered good. There are many examples of characters that fall under the male gaze or have criticizable characteristics or moments written by men that have still stood as empowering and beloved characters to women everywhere. However, we are going to start with discussing female characters that I personally think set great examples of who women could be in media if they existed outside of the male gaze. A few that come to mind for me are Dani from Midsommer, the girls from Little Women, Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games, Marta from Knives Out, Kayla from 8th grade, the women from Harry Potter, Erin Brockovich, and many more.
I had the audacity to forget my favorite show's women. Downton Abbey. Also, while I'm here, Danielle from Ever After.
You'll notice from this list that many of the characters are written by women, but you'll also notice that some of them aren't. This is a perfect example of how men are capable of writing a great female protagonist, and we will discuss how in a moment. So what sets these women apart from some of the others we will be discussing today? When looking at this lineup of women, you'll definitely see some common characteristics. The main ones that stand out to me are that they are strong, empathetic, brave, interesting, and real. They're beautiful, but it's not a characteristic that overshadows their intelligence or their depth. They are emotional without shame. They feel real emotions and hardship without being portrayed as weak for it. They have ambition and fear in unison. Their soft side isn't mutually exclusive with their strength and resilience. And what I think all of these things have in common is that they're humanizing. Their traits aren't exaggerated in a way that takes away from other areas of their identity. They're multiple things at once in a way that accurately describes the human experience. They give women a chance to be portrayed as our true form and not just the one society has given us. I think a great example of this can be seen in the male-written character of Marta from Knives Out. When I first watched this movie, her character really stood out to me for reasons that I really couldn't pinpoint at the time, but when thinking on it further, I realized it's because of how refreshingly real she seems. Not only just as a female character, but as like a well-written character. Marta is kind, soft-spoken, shy, and empathetic, while also being extremely strong and brave at the same time. We follow her character through extreme traumas, and we watch the emotional toll it takes on her. But she's never portrayed as weak. She's extremely resilient even when breaking down in tears. She takes on both sides of the spectrum that has seemingly been set for women in media in a very natural and realistic way, similar to the women I know in real life. These traits showcase something that I actually think is very special about women in our collective experience. Many times we do take on both of these roles simultaneously, both the sweetness and the strength. But for some reason, you don't really see these two traits coincide in the same nuanced way they do in real women. Almost as if to say we couldn't possibly hold the depth it takes to be both at once. I think another great male-written female character is Dani from Midsommer. This is one of those characters where you can tell she was written just to be a good character outside of the male gaze's influence. I personally like Dani because I think she explores a darker and more vulnerable side of women and our pain that you don't really see explored in media that much. It's a side we've kind of been taught to hide, so to see such a good representation of female anger and hurt outside of just a black and white villain is really refreshing. And honestly, I think it does a lot of good in moving us towards a better understanding of the female emotional depth. Not going to spoil it, but even with the darker ending, it is a horror movie after all. You are still meant to empathize with her and her pain, even in her most twisted, questionable moments. Now, I think there's much to say about all of the female characters I listed, and we could dive deeper into what makes them individually great if we wanted to, but for the sake of time, I think the overarching point for all of them is just that they portray women in a real way. You can tell they are either written by a woman who knows from experience women's emotion and depth of life, or a man that has taken the time to empathize and really understand a female character's point of view. They aren't exaggerated or oversimplified or exploited, they just genuinely seem like women you could know in real life. It's a special moment that women in media aren't really given as much, where the character becomes a real person to the viewer. Now that we have gone over the good, let's discuss some of the flaws I see in today's media that create the disconnect between fictional women and real life women. There's an endless list of female characters written by men for men that are still well beloved by many women. I can personally name a ton of female characters I absolutely love, even while understanding how they negatively contribute to female stereotypes. Some of these stereotypes include
the Ice Queen. A very broad trope that covers many different forms of women perceived to be cold or icy in demeanor. This trope oftentimes concludes with the Ice Queen thawing, many times from the love of a man. I personally think this trope showcases how in the world of misogyny, women are expected to have a level of warmth and submissiveness to them or they will quickly be negatively labeled. The trophy woman. An undeveloped, pretty character that only exists to serve the purpose of being arm candy or to be used to further the male protagonist's plot, sometimes even being brutally killed or assaulted to fuel a revenge story. The femme fatale. Mysterious and sexy, but dangerous. This sensual character is usually known to exploit or lure men into some sort of trap, I also get the feeling with this trope that it is, again, used to villainize women who act differently from the warm and innocent gender role men expect or have expected of us, especially around the time this trope became popular. The damsel in distress. An extremely common trope in which a female character at some point needs saving from a male, or sometimes seemingly exists just to give the male protagonist someone to save in general. A few examples are seemingly every animated Disney movie ever, and every movie ever made.
I'm a damsel. I'm in distress. I can handle this.
The Mrs. Male character. This trope is usually for male characters that are literally given a bow or something to create a female counterpart, but for this video, I'm going to use this title for an extremely masculinized female character that is completely written like a man and given tits, sometimes even in the name of representation.
These are just to name a few. Let's look at the damsel in distress for a moment. This is one that creeps up and overlaps with the other stereotypes quite often, as do many of these tropes. A perfect example of characters that embody this stereotype are the Indiana Jones and James Bond girls, which actually take on many of the stereotypes as the trophy arm candy women as well. They always follow a similar set of characteristics that ensure that they are gorgeous women with enough sex appeal to grab the attention of men, but never overshadow their male protagonists. They almost always at some point become a damsel in distress in need of saving, no matter how strong they may be as a woman. Marion from Indiana Jones, for example, is a character I absolutely love. She is strong, independent, sassy, and charming, and she gets to wear the prettiest dress ever.
Yeah, I'm talking about this one.
Can I hear a little commotion for the dress? A little bit?
Yeah, I'm a grandma, I know.
Yet she suddenly turns damsel in distress in need of Indy saving at random points in the movie. She is still put in the dainty, feminine outfits that, though very cute, are just there to serve the men she's supposed to appeal to.
This is actually something that the actress actively fought against, citing, along the way, there were some places where the script sort of tipped Marion into the old damsel in distress version of a female character, and I was very much fighting for her to have a consistent strength. I don't think you can create a scene like that in the Raven Bar and then suddenly make someone go, ooh, help, you know? It doesn't really work, so I wanted to keep her strong and resourceful and keep her a woman who had something and reached out for a solution in every situation, as opposed to going, oh my god, I can't handle this, or I can't do this. And while you can definitely see the female influence in her character, and she does do a much better job of being feminist than even some modern day female characters, the moments she does turn damsel in distress really stand out not only as a reminder of the constant misogyny we have to fight against, but also as a tool to further Indiana Jones' plot and masculine strength. In fact, Marion would just be another flat and stereotypical female character if her actress Karen Allen wasn't actively advocating for her throughout the entire filming process. For example, the scene where she uses her new dress to instead smuggle a knife was originally just supposed to be a scene where Marion seduces Dr. Bullock until Karen stepped in and asked Steven Spielberg if she could help rewrite it to something a little less demeaning. Her character is such a great example of how important female involvement and voice is in creating a well-written female character. We have Karen Allen to thank for why Marion stands out amongst the other Indiana Jones women.
Now let's look at the trope of the Ice Queen. This trope can manifest itself in a couple of ways. It can either be a tale of how all an icy woman needs to thaw is the love from a man. Or it can serve as a cautionary tale of what happens to women when we take on the same level of sternness and ambition that is socially acceptable for men to gain success. Almost as if to say, if a woman gets too strong or too determined or too goal-focused, which takes away women's focus from men and being the homemaker, which is the role traditionally put on women throughout history, they can only head in the direction of a stone-cold bitch. Again, it's the matter of black and white for these female characters. It sometimes seems as if male writers can't comprehend that we have more complexity than that and we don't exist inside of a cartoon. I think the most polarized example of an ice queen would be Miranda Priestley from Devil Wears Prada. She's a perfect example of how a lot of the women that fall into this trope are actually inexcusable bitches. Another example would be Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones, which, yeah, she's straight up evil. But their portrayal is not necessarily the aspect I'm critiquing. They make great villains and characters. They are great villains and characters. The issue is how misogyny creeps up and ensures that these portrayals of goal-oriented women are the only ones we get to see in media. Miranda Priestley, for example. She is a goal-oriented, passionate woman who throws herself into her work. Therefore, she must be a cold-hearted villain. Not to say that women like that don't exist. I mean, her character was written by a woman. But we all know the implications of her portrayal in the world of misogyny when left unchallenged by other good, non-villainous portrayals of girl boss women like her. The harm doesn't come from the existence of these characters, it comes from the portrayal that is placed in men's minds of what industrious women must be. A more passive example of the Ice Queen trope would be the beloved character of Princess Leia from Star Wars. Her story arc is the perfect example of this trope in romance form, where a man comes along and thaws her heart with love and desire for him. She too can also be seen falling into the damsel in distress trope many times as well. Again, becoming soft because of love is not inherently wrong, and in fact, I think it's rather sweet and true for many people in the real world. The real issue lies with how men have been taught to digest and interpret it. Han is, in theory, an ice king, but ultimately, Leia thaws first, serving the male gaze.
I love you.
I know.
I think that's the issue of much of what we are discussing. There's not always something wrong with the characteristics of the tropes themselves, but who they are clearly serving. Stereotypes gain their harm when being used to talk down to the group they are portraying. That is the issue I'm trying to convey. Now, we could go more in depth about all of these tropes, but again, for the sake of time, let's take a look at some more common characteristics that can be seen amongst female characters, especially when written by men. One huge one that really bothers me is the portrayal of strength being meshed with sex appeal. Going along with what I mentioned in the Ice Queen section of this video, strength in female characters a lot of the times is portrayed only alongside being an unlikable, stern, or evil character, or being sexually appealing to the male eye. Almost as if men won't be openly accepting of strong women unless their strength plays into their desires and stereotypes. Look at the women of Marvel's costumes compared to the men's, their posters, their fight scenes. A lot of these aspects have inherently more sexual additives than their male counterparts. Black Widow, for example, she can be considered to fall under the umbrella of the femme fatale trope. Dangerous, strong, resilient, kind of cold, mysterious, badass. Badass, more like that ass, am I right? That's what Marvel would say when creating Black Widow's posters. Exaggerated, Photoshop breasts, ass shots. It's quite obvious who these are supposed to appeal to. Besides, the gays. And just compare the reception of Black Widow as a Marvel superhero in comparison to Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel was one of the first on-screen Marvel women to not only be written by a woman, but also, unlike Black Widow, be written completely outside of the male gaze. No skin-tight costume, isn't innocent to please men, isn't sexualized, no love interest, etc. And a lot of men were very bothered by her character. Look, I don't even like her character in the movies that much, and I can still see what's going on here. Men are not used to female characters existing for themselves and outside of their set list of acceptable characteristics for women. If women can't be desirable while being a badass, they are only left to be interpreted as villains. You can see it happening with the reception and harsh criticism from men towards Captain Marvel when first released. Men were extremely vocal about how she was a villain for doing the same things that endless other men have been doing in action movies for years. People specifically had a problem with a scene where she assaults a man who was literally harassing her, I might add, by painfully gripping his hand and then proceeds to steal his motorcycle. Because duh, no hero has ever done that in the history of film. And what it comes down to is not the fact that she committed grand theft auto, but the fact that she did not respond to the male harassment in a gentle, submissive, or even sexy way. In this moment, she actively did the opposite of what the male gaze would deem as acceptable, and men are just not used to seeing media that doesn't cater to them. Hence why this was received as an attack, and she was unfairly deemed a villain. In fact, let's take a look at an actual Marvel villain beloved by all. Loki. He's definitely never done anything worse than hurt a man's hand, right? Otherwise, he'd get the same criticism, right? Wait, he's still beloved by all and immediately forgiven and deemed a hero the moment he sets on a redemption arc? Wait, he's given an entire show further humanizing him and solidifying him as just a misunderstood guy who murdered and tried to murder thousands of people just because he's in emotional pain? Seems fair. You see my point. People can criticize a character in any way they like. Like, yeah, Captain Marvel was arguably a jerk in that scene. But let's keep the same energy with their male counterparts and stop pretending we ever cared that much about a stolen motorcycle. Another common theme I see for female characters that are supposed to be strong is just removing their femininity completely. Sometimes even to the point of a stereotypical male character just being repackaged as a woman. A great example of this is another Marvel character, Valkyrie. There's literally nothing feminine about her character, which is fine. Not all women are feminine, but she almost falls on the I'm not like other girls, I'm one of the guys spectrum. She's violent, rude, unapologetic, and masculine. Her character could be completely replaced by a male and it would have no implications or effect on anything at all other than the whole female Valkyrie warrior thing. This doesn't seem like it's based around the male gaze, but I think it is. Being a sexually appealing, submissive woman is not the only way that the male gaze can manifest itself. The character Valkyrie was significantly more well received than Captain Marvel, despite being even more aggressive and having even less moral drives. Why is that? Well, for one, she's in the shadow of a prominent male protagonist, and two, she only presents traits and behaviors that other men can relate to and are commonly seen in other male characters in film. She's able to be perceived as a male character with boobs, which men are more likely to accept than if she had a hint of femininity that would make them feel less able to relate to her. There is such a villainization and misunderstanding of femininity in media. I think this is why hyper-masculine female characters like Valkyrie exist. It seems that male writers don't know how to associate soft femininity with strength in any real way. A lot of times when a character is soft and feminine, they are just walked all over. Adding on to this, let's take a look at a portrayal of a female character that I actually hate. Live action Cinderella. Can someone please explain to me how a movie made in 2015 somehow managed to make their female protagonist even more bland and submissive than the original made in the sexist times of the 1950s? Don't get me wrong, the live action Cinderella is definitely a guilty pleasure of mine. I mean, it caters to all my cottagecore dreams, but who wrote this? Who wrote this?
Me. Gilderoy Lockhart.
I honestly might make a separate video about this, that's how much it bothers me. So I won't dive too deep for now, but let's just say this is the perfect example of how men oftentimes can't fathom soft, kind femininity alongside strength. Because you guessed it, this film disguised for women and young girls was completely written and directed by men. Her character in this film is the most kind, soft, gentle, feminine, princess-like girl, which is lovely. If it didn't completely sacrifice her ability to stand up to her abusers and pretend or do anything other than act like she genuinely likes the abuse. Because of course, have courage and be kind, the movie's catchphrase for women means completely give up your mental and bodily autonomy to please your abusers and look kind and flowy about it the whole time. She embodies the submissive gender role housewives of decades past so well, it's kind of shocking. You know, when her dying mother passed down that catchphrase to her in her childhood, I don't think this is what she had in mind for how she would heed her advice.
Hi, editing Emmy here. Yeah, I made the mistake of rewatching this movie after I had written and recorded my script, and while I do agree with most of what I said, I'm here to say that I went way too harsh on this movie and to take my intensity with a grain of salt. I also feel like I kind of came off as victim blamey, which is definitely not what I meant. While my points still stand, it's definitely not as bad as I remember. Oops.
The misunderstanding and weaponization of femininity leads me to another huge issue of how female media is perceived in society. Why can't men empathize with women? There's a reason that women consume male-dominated film and stories without the bat of an eye and fully grasp the story and emotions being told. We as women understand that men experience emotions in the world in many of the same ways we do. Men haven't been portrayed in the same way that women have to where we can't grasp them as real, nuanced people anymore. To us, they are just people we can relate to. But it definitely does not work the same way if roles are reversed. A lot of stories centering around women, even without an inherently feminine story, immediately get labeled as a girls' movie. Ironically, I bet you a bunch of men have already clicked off of this video after labeling it as just a subject for women. If you have stuck around for the right reasons, we love you and appreciate you. It seems that we can never get women-based media that's just perceived as neutral. It seems like it's always being labeled as girly or feminist, or just being casually avoided by men if it's regarding anything even remotely related to the female experience, which, might I add, is just the human experience. Media about women shouldn't automatically be labeled as for women. This is one of the reasons why I love the existence of Bo Burnham's 8th Grade so much. It centers around a young girl, but it's obviously supposed to represent young people's experience of growing up as a whole. I think it's awesome that a film like this exists as a well-done stepping stone into men understanding women through empathy and representation, especially for a younger audience. When men and young boys watch this movie, Kayla's character and story is written in a way to where they can see themselves in her. I also think showcasing this age does a good job of bridging a problematic gap of women's portrayal in media. As I mentioned earlier, there's a huge gap of representation of children as a whole in this very interesting and crucial stage of growing up. Not only is this just a missed opportunity for storytelling, but it also contributes to a harmful interpretation of girls turning into women. Girls in media seem to just go from innocent children to sexualized high schoolers with nothing in between. Not only does it just feel kind of gross, but it also shows how women are sexualized as soon as it's socially acceptable. I actually think it's kind of weird how often high school is chosen as a point of interest instead of college, and then proceeds to sexualize these minors, both boy and girl. The sad truth is that as soon as girls start growing boobs, their sexuality is already being viewed as profitable, and we're just so much more than that. You see the amount of female-oriented media dwindle down once we hit this age because we're much more easily meshed in with men's media once we can be sexualized and desirable. And I think this is why you see hyper-feminine media mainly existing for little girls. We aren't morally marketable to men at that age, which is why it's some of the only female media you see that exists completely outside of the male gaze. In fact, let's talk about the Bechdel Test for a moment. The Bechdel Test is where a movie must have two named female characters have a conversation with each other about anything other than a man. If you're not familiar with this, do some quick research, and it's shocking how many don't pass this test. However, I do want to mention that I think this test can be misused sometimes. Like, for example, I saw someone talking about Shawshank Redemption, my personal favorite movie ever, as an example of a movie that didn't pass the test, which is kind of ridiculous considering it takes place in an all-male prison. And yeah, I just don't really think that's a good talking point for the sake of feminism. However, let's take a look at some movies that do pass the Bechdel test with flying colors. Let's start with the feminist icon herself, Barbie. Barbie movies! If you're around my age, you most likely grew up with Barbie movies. I personally was obsessed with these growing up, and I bought every single one that came out up until I outgrew them. which I never really outgrew them because I still watch them way too often for a stable person. Bibble supremacy.
Delicious.
Something you will notice about these hyper-feminine, pink, sparkly, girly movies is that all of them pass the Bechdel test with flying colors. However, even more interestingly, a lot of them pass the reverse Bechdel test as well. These movies are specifically made with the expectation that young boys will not be watching them at all. So the fact that they still take the time to explore their male protagonists / love interests enough to give them backstories and hopes and aspirations and depth, no matter how small, is a testament to how easy it is to take the time to humanize the opposite sex, even when they're just serving as a love interest. Another example of a similar girl-targeted series is the Tinkerbell movies, which were a personal favorite growing up and to this day. Tinkerbell is the ultimate comfort movie. Don't at me, or do, you're entitled to your wrong opinion. Excuse me.
Excuse me.
While these films are a little less hyper-feminine and pink and sparkly, they still are obviously made to target young girls, and they do also pass the Bechdel test with flying colors. They also pass the reverse Bechdel test, just like the Barbie movies. All I'm saying is if movies aimed towards literal children can do it with this much ease, I don't know what the issue with the rest of Hollywood is. We truly are not asking for a lot. And I think at the end of this analysis, the true issue lies with a deep and unempathetic understanding of women as just as capable and developed and advanced as men. We simply do not deserve the cap and understanding that has been put over our head by the patriarchy. We have so much to offer, so many stories to be told, so much to be developed and praised. You know, originally this video was going to be specifically about the strong female character and how it's not actually as progressive or feminist as we may think. But the more I wrote and thought about this issue, the more I realized the problems I have with that character trope are problems I have with all female characters. It's a collective issue through all female character tropes, and it comes down to lack of female writing and input, and lack of understanding of women as complex creatures like men. What I've realized is that being strong is not a character. Being strong is just a part of everyone. I personally think that most people are strong, they just maybe have never had to put it to the test. Humans are survivors. Odds are, if you put us through something difficult or scary, we are most likely going to choose to survive. Women have been doing this for decades upon decades, surviving unequal treatment, braving violence, braving abuse, braving a society that treats us as less than. Most women I know are incredibly strong, and they don't all have the same type of strength. Their strength is just something that complements all of their other beautiful traits. So at the end of the day, strong female characters aren't the beacon of feminist light that they try to sell to us. All they will be is just repackaged misogyny of underdeveloped characters until men as a whole start moving towards a more empathetic and deep understanding of women, and most importantly, women are finally given the voice we have been stripped of for years. We cannot continue to be expressed as women only through male eyes, or we will be misunderstood and deformed forever. It's time for us to fix the perception of us in society and replace it with the reality of just how amazing we are. We are already seeing the shift in society with more female writing and directing and stories being told. The statistics, while abysmal, do show a greater than subtle uptick in women behind the scenes, even reaching the mid 30% mark in some cases. Ooh, 30%. Lucky us. Greta Gerwig's Little Women is such a good example of this shift and what I think we'll see more of down the line. A female story being told by actual women. You can also see this progression in series like Marvel and Star Wars that we discussed earlier. The female characters are getting their own movies, non-skin tight costumes, backstories, TV shows. We really are progressing. Are we where we should be? Absolutely not. But for now, let's just support the women in the industry, look forward to the future, and most importantly, not fall for the non-progressive pandering that is just repackaged misogyny. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I've never written a script like this before, so hopefully it was actually enjoyable and not a complete drone of information overload. Again, this is just an opinion piece, and I'm more than happy to hear what you think about the subjects, or maybe if you took away something from this video. I had a lot of fun making this, and I look forward to making more things like this in the future, if I can get through the editing process alive. If there's anything in this video that you would like to see me talk about more in the future, please feel free to let me know. Thanks for sticking around if you have this far, and see you next time. Question mark. We're gonna leave a question mark there. See you next time, question mark. Okay, bye. Of this spectrum that has seemingly been set for women.